but actually quadrupling it, because that's how heat travels through food. This is of course not exclusive to pancakes, so you might want to remember that the next time you put something in the pan. Now back to the main question, what are the main differences between thick and thin pancakes, and what's best? The answer is simple. Thinner pancakes are a better option in almost every way. They cook faster, color better, they are less floury, easier to digest, and they also look pretty good. But hey, if you still prefer to eat thick pancakes, be my guest. Eating raw flour has never hurt anybody that I'm aware of. Something you should know is that color is no sign of pancakes being done. So if you think that your pancakes are 100% cooked on the basis that they have a lovely color, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that's unrealistic and they might well be undercooked despite not looking it. There are two things in the mixture that speed up the caramelizing process, which is what gives color to the pancakes. The first is the baking powder, which is needed as a rising agent, but it also lowers the pH of the batter, making it easier to caramelize. The second thing is the sugar. The more sugar you use, the more color you'll get. As I'm sure you can understand, neither of the ingredients speed up the cooking process. They only speed up the coloring process and lower the temperature at which it occurs, which has nothing to do with cooking the flour contained into the mixture. So how do we know if a pancake is really cooked? Exactly as you would do with any other food you put in the pan, by guessing. Unless of course you have a fancy and expensive equipment such a laser thermometer. And what is the right temperature for the pan? Once again, you'll have to make a guesstimate here, unless you have access to some fancy and rather expensive equipment. However, for the sake of being thorough, a temperature that will allow to cook the pancakes in a correct time is somewhere in between 230 and 260 degrees Celsius, or between 460 and 500 degrees Fahrenheit. But be warned, if you use a non-stick pan, the non-stick coating starts to decompose and becomes toxic at temperatures over 500 degrees Fahrenheit or 260 degrees Celsius, so you might want to be double extra careful in this case. What about the cooking time? Is there any rule? If the temperature of the pan is right, or at least close to the ones we mentioned a few seconds ago, your pancakes will cook in 45 seconds to a minute on the first side. If they are properly browned in less than 45 seconds, they are likely to remain raw in the middle. However, if they take longer than a minute to cook, they might end up overcooked. Is there a right moment to turn the pancakes over and cook the other side? Some say that they should be turned when the surface facing you becomes dry, and others like to turn them when some bubbles appear. These are both good solutions, and it really depends upon personal taste and quality of the batter. Personally, I like to turn pancakes when the first side is properly browned, which also happens to be when the surface facing you is dry. And how long will it take to cook the second side? Roughly half the time of the first side, as there isn't really much left to cook at this stage. But again, this only depends on how properly the first side was cooked. Now to the most important thing of the video, and then I promise I'll let you go. When it comes to pancakes, make sure to prepare a lot of them, otherwise you'll be very sorry when they're finished, especially if the recipe you followed was a good one. And here you have the final pancakes. If you follow the video paying attention instead of spending your time drooling, by now you should have a degree in pancake making. I hope you enjoyed this informative tutorial, which hopefully turned you into a master pancake maker. After our video for regular pancakes, we wanted to propose a recipe for gluten-free pancakes, as we are aware how difficult it is to make proper food with alternative gluten-free flours. Non-wheat flours react very strangely to both water and cooking, and for this reason, making good gluten-free foods can be a challenge even for the most experienced chefs. To begin with, simply place all the ingredients into a medium-sized bowl and stir to combine them properly. Due to the absence of gluten, we need a substitute to get a batter with the elasticity of a regular pancake batter. I wouldn't recommend using xanthan gum, as it is a pretty nasty ingredient. Not to mention that it can be extremely dangerous if not dissolved properly into the food. For the sake of making healthy recipes, we are not going to use any here. Instead, we are using psyllium husk, which is basically pure natural fiber. Once you have the batter ready, let it rest for 5 minutes so that the psyllium have the time to swell and thicken the batter. Once the time has elapsed, heat the pan over a medium heat and get ready for cooking. If you haven't watched our previous video for pancakes, I strongly suggest you to do so, just to get a better idea about this amazing dish. When the pan is hot, pour in some of the mixture and cook it for roughly 1 minute, or until you see the surface drying completely, as you can see here. Once you've got the first side right, you can flip the pancake over and cook it on the second side for roughly half the time of the first side, or until slightly colored. Once you've done that, you can simply repeat the process until you're out of batter. It is important to mention that gluten-free foods do not react well if left to sit on the kitchen counter for a few hours, as they all tend to become very hard and dry. And here you have the final pancakes. Don't you dare telling me that these pancakes don't look as appetizing and mouth-watering as regular ones. I can think of at least 5 ways to make vegan cream cheese, and they all have the potential to yield amazing results. However, there is one of the methods that leaves me speechless every single time, and the funny thing is that it involves only one single ingredient. If you want to create a pretty impressive cream cheese, keep watching because trust me, it's about to happen. To begin with, place a strainer into a bowl, line it with a piece of muslin cloth and pour in the yogurt. If you don't have a muslin cloth, you can also use a kitchen towel. Now, fold the extra cloth over the yogurt, place the bowl into the fridge and let the yogurt to strain for 18 hours. Once the time has elapsed, you will see that a considerable amount of liquid, about half of the way of the original yogurt, has been strained from the yogurt, leaving behind a thick cheese-like paste, which is in fact the final cream cheese. All you need to do now to complete this basic cream cheese is to carefully transfer it into a bowl, add in the salt and stir well to give it a uniform thickness and to dissolve the salt. Now I have a couple of things to add. Firstly, for this recipe it is mandatory to use a soy yogurt that has no flavoring whatsoever. And I'm telling you this because many brands claim that their yogurt is natural or unflavored, but the reality is that they do add some vanilla extract to it, which doesn't really go well with a savory cream cheese. Secondly, I understand that straining some yogurt might sound unusual as a technique to obtain cream cheese, and because I don't want you to trust my word for it, I'd like to tell you that the culture used to make soy yogurt is almost invariably the exact same used to make proper vegan cheese, and that is why this product will not only have a beautiful consistency, but also a unique and authentic cheese flavor. Besides, it's not that I'm asking you to fly to the moon, you simply have to strain some yogurt to see if you enjoyed the thing. The next recipe will be on how to use this basic cream cheese to create some stunning mixed cheese canapés with different and amazing flavor combinations, so make sure to stay tuned as it is going to be something unprecedented. Due to the high level of requests for gluten-free recipes, we decided to simplify one of the hardest things that you can encounter as a gluten-free baker, the flour blends. In this video, we will not only show you how to mix flours, quite literally, but we will also share some great information about gluten-free flours in general. As you can probably imagine, mixing a few flours together is not rocket science. In fact, the recipe consists of sifting all the ingredients into a bowl and whisking thoroughly to properly combine them, which is not something I would necessarily call quantum mechanics. But that said, I'm not a quantum mechanics expert, so maybe that's why. Anyway, there are a few things I'd like to mention before this video is over. Gluten-free baked recipes rarely ask for one single flour, as it is by blending them that you obtain a final product that mimics standard wheat flour. For this reason, we decided to create our own blends so that we can use them for our recipes whenever needed. Now, I want you to know that our blends are not meant to be used for recipes that are not ours, as we simply cannot guarantee they will work at all times, despite the fact they might actually work pretty well. Also, there is an endless amount of flour combinations that can be made, so by no means we believe that ours are the best, but simply the ones we have developed and decided to share. I want to stress the importance of owning a kitchen scale that measures in grams, in order to get the best out of our recipes. Cups and spoons might look like the smartest option to quickly weigh ingredients, but when it comes to consistency, they are pretty unreliable and rarely allow people to make precise recipes, especially baked ones. Once the flours have been mixed, you can simply place the blend into a bag and store it in a cool place. The mix will have roughly the shelf life of the flours from which it was made. And this is the final gluten-free mix. This is not a dish, so I won't bother telling you how good it tastes, how beautiful it looks, and how many attempts it took me to achieve it. It's flour, nothing more. After receiving many of your requests for gluten-free bread, here we are sharing with you the recipe for some delicious buns. Gluten-free bread in general has the tendency to be quite dense and anything but appealing. Will this be the case for our recipe as well? I seriously doubt that. To begin with, dip the sugar, the salt and the yeast into the water and stir the ingredients until the yeast is completely dissolved, or until you get bored, whichever occurs first. Next, place the flour and the psyllium into a bowl and whisk to properly combine them. Now pour the water mixture into the bowl and whisk the ingredients together to obtain a sort of batter, which is in fact the final dough. You might be thinking, wait a minute, but that's not a dough. Actually it is. Leave the mixture to rest for 8 minutes and you'll be surprised by what psyllium can do to a liquid ingredient. It's almost magical. Just trust me, okay? Once the time has elapsed, use a spatula to scrape the dough from the bowl and grease your hands with some oil. Take the dough and roll it between your hands for a few seconds, just to make it round and to appreciate how soft it is. Now transfer the rounded dough into another bowl, which should also be greased with some oil. The use of oil is not strictly required for this recipe, but it does help to make the process more pleasurable, and because I want you to be zen during your cooking, I do recommend using it. At this point, simply cover the bowl with some cling film and leave the dough to rise in a warm place for 1 hour. Once the time is up, you will notice that the dough has roughly doubled in size, which you can confirm by looking at it and seeing that it is, in fact, twice as big as before. Transfer the dough onto a working surface and divide it into 4 pieces using a knife or a pastry scraper. Grease your hands once again, remember, zen, take one of the pieces of dough and roll it between your hands as you did before to create a small ball. Place the bowl onto a tray lined with greaseproof paper or onto a non-stick tray and repeat the process with the other pieces of dough until there is nothing more to roll. The little oil that remains on the dough balls will help the surface to brown properly. Now cover the tray with the second tray and let the dough rise for 20 minutes before moving on. Also, preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius, which is about 355 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the time has elapsed, uncover the tray and bake the buns for 20 minutes to complete the process, remembering to rotate the tray halfway through the cooking time to allow for even browning of the surface. These buns have very little in common with the standard gluten-free breads you can buy at the supermarket. The softness of these delicious pockets of flavor is simply unparalleled, and I'm sure you will agree with me once you've tried them. Plus, they are so dead easy to make. Have you ever attempted to make vegan crepes? And what about whole wheat crepes or gluten-free crepes? Well, regardless of the results you have managed to achieve, the recipe we are about to share is sure to be nothing short of extraordinary. It's super easy, incredibly quick to make, and it requires only very basic ingredients. Could you ask for more? Let's begin. To begin with, place the sugar, the lemon zest, the milk, the vanilla extract, the flour and the baking soda into a bowl and whisk the ingredients well to obtain the final batter. In all honesty, I love it when recipes kickstart like this. Let the batter sit for about 5 minutes so that the flour will properly hydrate and create a lump-free mixture. Now, since this recipe can also be done by using a blender, we are going to make the whole wheat version using a NutriBullet. To do that, simply place all the ingredients into the blender's container and blitz them until you obtain a smooth and lump-free batter. That's it. The whole wheat flour that will give the best result is the kind that doesn't have large pieces of bran in it. For this reason, you can either sift the flour first to remove the larger particles and then measure it, or simply use the blender method, which will completely smash the bran. For the gluten-free version, pick the mixing method you prefer and proceed in the exact same way as the other recipes. Remember that whatever preparation method you decide to follow, the batter should always rest for at least 5 minutes, and if you can make it 10, it will thank you later. To cook the crepes, place a non-stick pan over a medium heat, and as soon as it's hot, pour in a small amount of the batter and spread it with a tablespoon using circular motions. The crepes need to cook for about 30 seconds on each side to get some light color and at the same time stay super soft. However, feel free to experiment as you proceed with the cooking. Once the first side is cooked, simply flip the thing on the other side and gently press it all around its surface to achieve some extra coloring. We find the spreading method much more efficient than the pan tilting method, as it is easier to quickly master and also yields much thinner and more even crepes. For the sake of being thorough, as usual, here we are using our trusted non-stick pan, which happens to be 26 cm or 10 inches large. In regard to the quantity of batter needed, we used 15 ml or 1 tablespoon for small crepes, and about 50 ml or 3 tablespoons for larger crepes. Now, if that wasn't some easy preparation, I don't really know what is. If I had to recommend a recipe to start with, the blended whole wheat version would be my first pick, as it creates a batter that is super easy to spread, crepes that are unbelievably soft and flavorsome, and it is also accidentally the more wholesome one. Have you ever struggled while trying to cook things like sauces, soups, curries, or even risottos, just because you couldn't find a good plant-based creamy component? Well, there are many ways to add creaminess back into a dish without necessarily having to add unhealthy ingredients. So let's see how we do just that and add some serious richness back into your food. Today we are going to create 3 completely different creams, so that you'll be able to decide which one is better suited for you and the recipe you are preparing. To make the first cream, which is the lowest in fat, simply place the tofu and the water into a food processor and blend them until the 2 ingredients combine into a fluid, creamy mixture, which is in fact the final cream. This is one of our favorite options when it comes to adding little if any fat into a recipe, but it doesn't necessarily have to float everyone's boat, so let's move on to the second method. For the second method, place the cashew nuts and the water into a container and blend them at high speed until you obtain a super creamy fluid paste that you can use to create the most amazing and velvety risottos and pasta sauces. The cashews we are using are not soaked, because this blender is perfectly capable of turning them into a smooth cream. However, if you are using a less powerful blender, you can always soak the nuts for a few hours or add a bit more water. Last but not least, the third option, which is for those who don't mind the use of oil. This method yields a cream that is optimal for savory preparations, and quite frankly, it also happens to be a delicious dipping sauce. The first thing we are going to do is to clean the onions, cut them in half, steam them for 30 minutes with the cut facing down, and cool them down just a bit. Once that's done, measure the amounts of onions specified in the recipe and place them into the jug of a blender. Next, add in the oil, you can use any oil you prefer, the lemon juice and the salt, and blend the ingredients together to create the most amazing and smooth emulsion. Just add a dollop of this cream onto a soup and see it turning into something twice as beautiful and way more delicious. These 3 creams are able to deliver very different results depending on the quantity used and the application. However, the best way for you to find out which one you prefer and for what use it is best is to try them. After all, I'm not really asking you to blend white truffles, champagne or saffron, right? Other popular options to get creaminess back into a dish are coconut milk, which works perfectly but also adds saturated fats and a lot of flavor that might be inappropriate for the dish you are making, soy cream, which is also great but not easy to find all over the world, and vegan butter, which is generally tasty and effective but also usually made out of over-refined ingredients. And here you can see the final creams. We hope that you will find these 3 recipes useful and that they will help you to be more creative while making any divine vegan treat you like to enjoy. Today's recipe is considered traditional basically all over the world. It's white bread. We thought that this preparation was a good starting point for the bread section of our channel, as it is very easy to make and pretty much every person on this beautiful planet has come across it. If properly prepared, white bread can be the perfect accompaniment for almost every meal, be it a sweet or a savory one. To make the bread, let's start by adding all the flour and the yeast into a large bowl and stir in the ingredients well to combine them. Pour in all the non-dairy milk and mix with a fork until you obtain a sort of rough dough. Now it is time to get your hands dirty, but you will be relieved to know that there is no crime involved. Start by simply kneading the dough until roughly combined. Transfer the dough onto a working surface and knead it for at least 5 minutes or until it becomes smooth. If you have never really got into baking your own bread, then you are really missing out. If you regularly bake and eat your own bread, then we know that you know nothing beats freshly prepared homemade breads. The bouquet of aromas that spreads all over the house whilst baking really does turns the task of preparing bread into a real pleasure. Once the dough has reached the right consistency, dust it with some flour, place it into a bowl and cover it with a kitchen towel. Place the bowl in a warm place and let the dough rise for 1 hour. Some people like to place the dough inside the bed to rise, as it apparently has the perfect temperature for homemade breads. However, I prefer to keep my personal life and my work life separate, if you know what I mean. Anyway, once the time has elapsed, the dough will have roughly doubled in size, and that's not only perfectly normal, but also what we were looking for. Now transfer the dough onto the working surface and gently pat it down into a flat shape. Take one side of the shape and fold it a third of the way over the rest of the dough. Take the other side of the dough and stretch it over the first fold. Now, grab the side of the dough closest to you and start rolling it over the remaining dough to obtain the final loaf shape, just like as you can see here. Now, depending on the tin you are using, you might need to shape the dough to make it better match with the size of the tin. For the sake of being thorough, we are using 1 pound 500 grams loaf tin for this quantity of flour. Now cover the tin with a kitchen towel and let the dough rise for another hour in the same warm place, preferably away from the bedroom. Once the time has elapsed, preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius or 380 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the oven is at the right temperature, bake the bread for 25 minutes, removing the towel from the tin to avoid burning down your house, and more importantly, your bread. Once the cooking time is up, you should have one of the most amazing white breads you have ever seen sat in front of you. Look at that! I can think of a minimum of 10 sweet and savory preparations to make with this wonderful bread, and they are all sure to taste quite delicious. Hi and welcome to the Vegan Corner. Today's recipe is for a flavorsome and full-bodied Asian-inspired noodle bowl. For all of those who love to cook, but also know that life does get in the way sometimes, this is the perfect recipe to add to your quick and easy repertoire. To begin with, let's chop a few things. Cut the shiitake mushrooms into slices and, if using some more exotic mushrooms like shimeji, separate them from each other. Now slice the ginger and then cut the carrots and the pak choi into long pieces. You can cut them any way you want actually, but for the sake of getting a more appealing and easy to eat noodle bowl, we decided to go for elongated strips. Next, let's prepare the broth in which the noodles will peacefully swim until you decide to devour them. Place a saucepan over a medium heat and tip in the stock, the soy sauce, the ginger and the garlic and stir the ingredients well. Now, throw in the shiitake mushrooms and bring the liquid to the boil. As soon as the liquid starts boiling, add in the carrots, the snap peas, the shimeji mushrooms and the pak choi, before stirring once again, bringing back to the boil and cooking the ingredients in the broth for 3 minutes to complete the process. At the end of the cooking time, you might want to remove the ginger just to make sure that you don't end up biting into it later on and start screaming. The last thing to do is to cook your favorite noodles as instructed on the packet. We used buckwheat noodles because they seemed a nice option, but I wouldn't be too concerned about using any other kind of noodle. Incredibly enough, it is now time to plate up, so place an appropriate amount of the broth with some of the veggies into a bowl, and then add some of the cooked noodles on top of it. You don't want the noodles to be completely submerged into the liquid, but just to cover them about halfway through. To garnish, add some sliced radishes, some carrots, more of the veggies from the broth, and also some thinly sliced green onions or scallions and a wedge of lime. And here is the final noodle bowl, garnished the way we like it. There isn't really a perfect way to garnish this bowl, so it does make a whole lot of sense to use ingredients that you enjoy and that are easy to find where you live. So, what are you waiting for? One of the most appetizing and popular Italian dishes I can think of is baked pasta. People are usually more familiar with another kind of baked Italian delicacy, which is lasagne. However, by baking pasta you can obtain a completely different yet very impressive result, which I find to be the absolute best match for any busy festive season. To begin with, let's make the sauce for the pasta. Take your favorite pan, place it over a medium heat, dip in the onions and the garlic, and cook them for a couple of minutes or until they soften a bit. Dip in the passata, clean its bottle with the water, add the tomato water to the pan and stir well to combine. We always like to clean the containers of sauces with water and use that liquid into the recipe, just to avoid wasting good quality ingredients. Now add in the salt, the olives, the oregano, the chili flakes and the baking soda. Stir to combine and bring the sauce to a boil. Once the sauce begins to boil, lower the heat to the minimum and start counting the cooking time. We like to cook our passata for about 15 minutes over the lowest heat. During this time the sauce should simmer just slightly and there is no need to stir it, unless this task makes you particularly happy. If the passata you are using is already quite thick, it will likely splatter all over your stove as soon as it starts boiling, which is a clear sign that you should cover the pan with a lid immediately. Once the time has elapsed, stir the sauce, turn off the heat and let it cool down completely before using it, remembering to adjust salt if necessary. For the bechamel sauce, place your second favorite pan over a medium heat and dip in the dry ingredients, followed by the milk. Whisk the ingredients to properly disperse the starch. Now, swap the whisk for a spatula and start stirring the ingredients. As soon as the milk is warm, you can add in the vegan butter and keep stirring to dissolve it. The butter adds a little extra richness to the sauce, but it is not strictly necessary, so feel free to skip this ingredient if you prefer not to use it. Stir constantly until all the butter is dissolved and the sauce thickens and reaches boiling point, and then turn off the heat. Once again, let the sauce cool down completely before using it. To cook the pasta, simply follow the instructions on the packet, but since we have to cook it again later on, you only want to cook the pasta for half the time stated on the packet. So if it says 6 minutes, cook it for 3 minutes, and if it says 10 minutes, cook it for 5 minutes. I know, I'm really good with complex calculations. Once the pasta is cooked, drain it, and we are ready to build the final dish. First, preheat the oven to 200 degrees Celsius or 390 degrees Fahrenheit, and then transfer the partially cooked pasta into a bowl, add in the tomato sauce, and stir the ingredients well to properly combine them. Take an oven dish, grease it, add in a layer of bechamel sauce, and level it down with a spatula. Now, add a layer of pasta and level it down. Then, repeat the process, so add in another layer of the bechamel and another layer of pasta. For the last layer, add in the bechamel and, for those of us who like to be indulgent, a good layer of your favorite meltable vegan cheese. You can either buy this ingredient, make our mozzarella cheese, or omit the cheese altogether. The pasta is now ready to go in the preheated oven, where it needs to cook for 15 minutes to complete the dish. One last tip and I promise I'll let you go. Let the baked pasta rest for 10 minutes before slicing it and serving it. This is not only to prevent you from burning yourself, but also because baked dishes keep their shape better when they cool down a bit. And this is how properly baked pasta should be, decadent looking and nothing short of extraordinary. The traditional Italian ingredients used in this preparation perfectly blend together to create a food that literally bursts with flavor at every single bite, which I'm sure you can gauge by yourself by simply looking at how beautiful it is. By now, it is perfectly clear to us that people prefer simple recipes over complicated ones, so despite my inner chef keeping on telling me to share with you boring and sophisticated preparations, I keep telling him to get lost, as we have a lot of work to do and plenty of people to please. So let's move on and turn a few simple ingredients into a truly nutritious showstopper. To begin with, let's chop a few ingredients. Since this is a noodle dish, cutting the vegetables into strips is the way forward, as they will be much easier to eat when the dish is ready. Start by cutting the spring onions, the corn, the peas and the peppers into strips or into long pieces. For the chili, cut it as you prefer and also use as much as you want of it. the courgettes should be cut into slabs and then into strips, like the other vegetables. And by the way, courgettes and zucchini are the same thing. The only difference is that courgettes have a British accent, although they sound French. Moving on, cut the broccoli into small pieces, as it would be quite a challenge to cut them into strips. For the carrots, we like to use a peeler to make super thin strips, instead of doing the more classic julienne. Now let's move on to the cooking process. Take a non-stick pan, place it over high heat and dip in the vegetables, the sugar and a couple of tablespoons of the water from the recipe. Cook the ingredients, stirring frequently until they get soft enough to properly blend into a noodle dish, about 4 or 5 minutes. On the side, mix the remaining water with the starch, add the mixture into the pan and stir. The starch will soon thicken and turn the water into a glossy and delicious looking sauce. Add in the soy sauce and stir it in to complete the condiment. To cook the noodles, simply follow the instruction on the packet, knowing full well that there is no one type of perfect noodles for this recipe, as they all work really well. You see, I even leave you in charge of the cooking of the noodles. You must be getting really good at cooking, aren't you? Add the cooked noodles into the pan and thoroughly mix the ingredients to combine them and complete the dish. As usual, remember to taste the dish and adjust salt if necessary. In case you're wondering, we used rice noodles. And here you can have a peek at the plated noodles, ready to be relished. The only way I know to make this dish taste even better is to eat it with chopsticks. Don't ask me why though, as I haven't the foggiest. This is the first recipe of our one-pot pasta week. This interesting and very un-Italian cooking technique allows you to create stunning pasta dishes in literally minutes with a minimal amount of effort. The first thing to do is to put the water and the salt into a non-stick pan, place it over a high heat, and bring the water to the boil. You could also tip in all the ingredients together, which would make sense considering the name of the recipe. However, we feel that by boiling the water first, the ingredients will cook much more evenly. Once the liquid reaches boiling point, you can tip in the pasta, the broccoli, the peas, and bring to the boil once again. As soon as the liquid is back to boiling point, turn the heat down to medium and start counting the cooking time, which really depends upon the pasta you are using. The liquid should simmer for the duration of the cooking time. We are using a pasta that should cook for 9 minutes to get it al dente, but we are actually going to cook it for 11 minutes. This might sound counterintuitive, but as opposed to the standard cooking method, pasta cooked in this way takes longer to cook than it would on its own in plenty of boiling water, so cooking it for 1 to 3 minutes more than recommended on the packet is actually a good thing. During the cooking time, make sure to stir the ingredients 3 or 4 times in total, just to make sure that they get an equal amount of heat during the cooking process. My number 1 tip when it comes to this dish is to let it rest at the end of the cooking time. That's right, stir the ingredients, turn off the heat, cover the pan with the lid, and let the pasta rest for 3 to 4 minutes before serving it. You might be wondering, won't this overcook the pasta? The answer is no. If all has gone as planned, you should be left with a glossy and shiny condiment created by the starch leaked from the pasta and the remaining cooking liquid. This condiment is not enough to excessively hydrate the pasta and overcook it. Once the resting time is up, adjust salt to taste, sprinkle the pasta with some parsley if desired, stir one last time, and serve. I know what you're thinking. Another green ingredient? What can I say? I like this pasta dish the way it is, so don't complain, okay? There, I added some red chili flakes. Are you happier now? At this point you should have in front of you a beautifully cooked and healthy dish that we are sure will impress even the fussiest Italian guest. This is the second recipe of our one-pot pasta series. In this episode we are going once again to use this cooking technique in order to get a delicious main course in no time. And we are also going to share with you our top tips to get the best out of your pasta. To begin with, place the water and the salt into a pan, place it over a high heat, and bring the water to the boil. Boiling the water first will allow the ingredients to cook more evenly. Once the liquid starts boiling, you can tip in the pasta, the pumpkin, the onions, and the rosemary, and stir before bringing the liquid back to the boil. The rosemary leaves can either be used whole or chopped, your choice. As soon as the liquid is boiling again, turn the heat down to medium and start counting the cooking time, which depends upon the pasta you are using. The pasta we are using will be cooked in about 13 minutes, and the liquid should simmer for the entire duration of the cooking time. During the cooking process, you want to stir the pasta about 4 times, so that every element of the dish gets an equal amount of liquid and heat. My second best tip about this cooking method is to keep some boiling water ready to use. This is because higher heat can make the water evaporate faster than expected, and because I don't want you to run all over the kitchen looking for boiling water as if there is no tomorrow, it makes a lot of sense to have it on hand. If you want to know what the first tip was, you will find it in our previous one-pot pasta video, which is linked in the cards. Once the cooking time has elapsed and the condiment of the pasta looks rich and creamy, you can turn off the heat, stir one last time, cover the pan with the lid, and let the pasta rest for 3 minutes. This will allow for the condiment to relax and to become even creamier. Once the resting time is up, taste the pasta, adjust salt if necessary, and serve. If you followed the recipe to perfection, at the end of the cooking process you should be drooling profusely, which is always the ultimate sign that the dish was properly prepared. Here is our third and last recipe of our one-pot pasta series. In this instance, instead of going wild with unusual flavor combinations, we decided to use a well-known dish to make this recipe, which is pasta alla puttanesca. As the dish was already plant-based, all we had to do was to adapt our favorite recipe to this particular cooking method, and voila! Balanced, tasty, and good for you. To begin with, dip the water, the salt, and the tomato passata into a pan, place it over a high heat, and bring the liquid to the boil. I can't believe what I'm doing. I'm actually not using a non-stick pan at this time. Unbelievable. Anyway, once the liquid starts boiling, you can tip in the pasta, the capers, the garlic, and the olives, and gently move the ingredients with a spatula so that the spaghetti strands don't stick to each other. As soon as the liquid is back to a simmer, turn the heat down to medium and start counting the cooking time, which depends upon the pasta you are using. The liquid should simmer for the duration of the cooking time. For the sake of being thorough, the pasta we are using will be cooked in roughly 11 minutes. As you already know, pasta takes a few minutes to properly soften, so if you are planning to use spaghetti, as we did, make sure that it is submerged into the cooking liquid as much as possible, or they won't cook evenly. The other option is to break the spaghetti in 2 parts, but that's really un-Italian, so not only can I not suggest you do that, even if I just did, but if you have some Italian guests, make sure not to let them see what you are doing to the spaghetti, or they might not be responsible for their actions. During the cooking time, you want to stir the pasta 3 or 4 times to properly mix the ingredients and allow for even distribution of the heat. My third best tip when it comes to this cooking method is to relax. The beauty of cooking pasta this way is that it is very difficult to overcook it, so take it easy, enjoy the cooking process, and be ready to taste something extraordinary. If you like to cook pasta the one-pot way and want to know what my other 2 best tips on the topic are, make sure to watch our previous videos on one-pot pastas, which are linked in the cards. Once the cooking time has elapsed and the spaghetti look velvety and luscious, you can turn off the heat, stir one last time, cover the pan with the lid, and let the pasta rest for 3 minutes. This will allow the condiment to relax, to thicken even more, and become opulent looking. Once the resting time is up, sprinkle the pasta with some parsley if desired, taste the spaghetti, adjust salt if necessary, and serve. If for some reason you believe that the cooking process was taken a bit too far, and the sauce now looks too thick, don't worry. Add a touch of water to the pan, and the sauce will go back to its succulent state in no time. Lately we have been sharing a decent amount of pasta preparations, but today's recipe is one of our most successful creations. Its simplicity and deliciousness are really surprising, and I can't wait to tell you how to prepare it. If you ever thought that oil-free preparations were the weak link of vegan cuisine, think again. To begin with, finely slice the leeks and dice the peppers. The size doesn't really matter in this case, but smaller pieces will better blend with the final pasta, especially if you are going to use long pasta like we did. Next, place a non-stick pan over a medium heat, dip in the sliced vegetables and some water, and cook the veggies for about 5 minutes or until soft, making sure to stir regularly. This process will take about 4 minutes. During the cooking process, feel free to add more water if you feel it is needed. As soon as the vegetables have softened a bit, you can add in the oregano and stir to combine. Once the vegetables are cooked, turn off the heat, transfer half of them into a container, add in the non-dairy milk from the recipe, and blitz until you obtain a fairly smooth and creamy sauce with a unique orange hue. It is amazing how vegetables from the allium family can create stunning creamy sauces without using any oil. I just love it. Once that's done, transfer the sauce back into the pan, stir the ingredients, and remember to taste the sauce and adjust the salt if you feel it is needed. To cook the pasta, simply follow the instructions on the packet. To avoid timing mistakes, we recommend you make the sauce first and then cook the pasta, but that's really up to you to decide. You might also want to reserve some of the water from the pasta pot, so that you'll be able to thin down the sauce later on if needed. Now, bring the sauce back to a simmer, add in the cooked pasta, and thoroughly mix the ingredients until the linguine strands are completely coated with the sauce, which will result in this amazing looking and luscious dish ready for you to consume. And here is the final linguine with pepper and leek cream. This is not the kind of recipe that everybody knows. However, I can personally guarantee that this preparation yields results that are half as difficult and twice as delicious as many other more popular Italian dishes. Whenever I hear the words creamy and pasta together, I'm sold. If for some reason you are as passionate as we are about pasta and mushrooms, but don't really know how to create something spectacular out of them, then I'm sure you'll find this brief recipe tutorial to be very helpful indeed. To begin with, dice the onions, the mushrooms, and the tomatoes. You can dice them finely if you wish to, but remember that pasta doesn't mind if the condiment is a bit chunkier. For the sage, simply chop it as finely as you want. Now to the cooking process. Place your favorite pan onto your favorite medium heat source and tip in the diced onions and the milk. Sweat the onions for about 3 minutes. Yes, onions can actually sweat. And then add in the sage and stir it in. The combination of mushrooms, sage and tomatoes creates a very interesting gamey flavor, which I personally find perfect for a pasta dish. Now add in the mushrooms and a touch of black pepper if desired. Stir and cook the mushrooms until they start to soften, which should be about 2 minutes. The next ingredient to go in are the tomatoes, which should also be cooked for about 1 minute or until soft. If at any point you see that the sauce is drying on you, you can always add in some extra milk or some of the water from the pasta pot. To complete the sauce, you simply have to add in the vegan cream, stir it in and add salt to taste, to make sure that the final pasta dish is up to your expectations. We recommend making the sauce first and then cook the pasta as instructed on the packet. However, you can also attempt the two tasks at once, just to prove to yourself that you are more than capable of multitasking in the kitchen. In case you fail miserably, I cannot be found accountable for the results in any shape or form, just to be clear. Moving on, as soon as the pasta is cooked, drain it, add it into the pan with the sauce, and then simply stir the ingredients together to obtain the final dish. In this instance we are using whole wheat pasta, not that we mind standard pasta obviously, but for the sake of being kind to all kinds of pasta, we thought it is a good idea to rotate them. Before serving, it would be wise to taste the dish and adjust the salt if necessary. And here you can have a look at the plated pasta dish, which is clearly asking me to eat it, so I'm afraid I'll have to leave you to the outro of this video. Hi and welcome to the Vegan Corner. Today's video is about a fragrant and delicious Asian-style fried rice. We used to love dishes like this back in the day, but now that we know about their fat content, we stay completely away from the ones served in restaurants. For this reason we had to find a way to make our own versions of this dish to keep enjoying them throughout the year. This recipe is one of our favorite variations of fried rice, and we hope you like it without the ridiculous amount of fat. To begin with, let's prepare the vegetables. First thing to do is to slice some ginger and chop it finely. Always be careful with ginger, as if you use too much, then your dish will taste even better. In all seriousness, we don't want to add too much ginger, as it really is a powerful beast. Now take the pepper, slice it and dice it to the desired dimension. When it comes to chopping vegetables that will end mixed with rice, we always recommend cutting them of a size similar to rice, as this will make the final dish more enjoyable. Next, finely slice a clove of garlic, or two if you like, as garlic is never undesired. However, for every clove of garlic you add, we recommend balancing out with a breath mint for afterwards. The last two ingredients to slice, finally of course, are the spring onions and the jalapeno pepper. Jalapenos are some of the milder of the commonly available chilies, and we use them to add a very light spicy note. It is up to you to decide if you want to set your mouth on fire by adding more, or to use just a little as we did. Now let's start cooking something. Place a pan over a high heat, tip in all the chopped vegetables and the sugar. Make sure to keep some water nearby, as it will be soon required. As soon as the vegetables start sizzling, stir the ingredients and cook them for roughly 5 minutes. As usual, add some water as soon as you see that the pan and the vegetables are asking for it. Generally there would be oil in there to stop things from catching to the pan, but we like fat-free recipes, so don't have many options here. We must use other liquids. Once the ingredients are cooked, add in the soy sauce followed by the cooked rice. Now stir well to properly combine the ingredients and complete the dish. If your burner is particularly powerful, you might want to turn it off before it starts burning the rice. One thing we really love about this kind of cuisine is that cleaning the pans has never been simpler. No fat equals no mess. And this is our version of an Asian-inspired fried rice without oil, which basically means that it's not fried at all. Have you ever wondered how to cook polenta? If you have, then this might just be the perfect video for you. And if you haven't, then you've got this far, there is really no point in turning back now. Real polenta has very little to do with its instant supermarket counterpart. It has a lot more flavor and also happens to be more nutritious. If you are still glued to the screen, it means that it is time to move on and cook some serious corn grits, or to try and find some super glue remover. Let's begin by placing a pot over high heat and pouring in all the water and the milk. At this stage, you could also add some herbs and spices if desired, but if you are making polenta for the first time, I suggest you to make it plain. Next, add the salt if desired, of course. Once the liquid reaches the boiling point, pour the polenta into the water whilst whisking to disperse it. As soon as the polenta thickens a bit, stop whisking, lower the heat to the minimum and cover the pan with the lid. Those bubbles you see are evil ones, so be careful because they really enjoy burning vegan people's skin. Leave the polenta to cook over the lowest heat for 10 minutes. Once the time has elapsed, remove the lid and stir the polenta vigorously, making sure to scrape the entire surface of the pan. Once you have done that, simply place the lid back on and cook for another 10 minutes. You want to repeat this process 4 times for a total cooking time of 40 minutes. Don't be afraid of cooking the polenta a little longer, 1 hour or so, as it is believed that the more you cook it, the more delicious it becomes. However, this might require you to add a little more water, so keep an eye on it. During the cooking process, polenta tends to catch to the bottom of the pan and caramelize. This is perfectly normal and there is really nothing you can do about it. Those parts of brown polenta are very prized in Italy, but honestly I'm not really a fan of them and prefer not to eat them. Once the cooking time has elapsed, you can serve the polenta as it is with any topping you desire. Try the combination with our ragu bolognese, link in the description, and you'll see how good this killer combination is. At this point, you can also pour it in a container and let it cool down completely. It will become a solid piece that can be easily sliced or diced. You should also know that it is basically impossible to eat polenta whilst still soft, because as I said, it hardens as it cools down. Now you see that layer of polenta stuck to the bottom of the pan? That's what usually makes the pot pretty difficult to clean, but if you follow our advice, you will have no issue with that. Simply tip in the baking soda and the water, bring to the boil, turn off the heat and place the lid on. Leave the pan undisturbed for 6 to 8 hours to let the baking soda do its magic. Once the time has elapsed, you'll see that cleaning the pan, it is not really that difficult anymore, as you can see here. And this is the final polenta, one of the most nutritious foods around. Now you might think, that's a whole lot of effort to get some polenta. Well, I not only disagree with that, but I also strongly suggest you to give this recipe a go and see what I'm talking about. This really is some serious food, no doubt about it. Here is a tutorial about how to get a perfect couscous at every single attempt. There are many people who regularly face a struggle to get the best out of their ingredients, so we have decided to dedicate an entire section of our channel to simple tutorials about how to properly cook some of the world's most popular ingredients. To prepare the couscous, let's start by adding your preferred cooking liquid to a saucepan and placing it over a high heat. Here we are using our fat-free coconut milk, which adds an extra dimensional taste to the final dish. However, feel free to use any other liquid you prefer, be it stock or simply water. The link for the recipe for both our coconut milk and our stock is in the description down below the video. As soon as the liquid reaches the boiling point, add the dehydrated onions granules, followed by the couscous. Now stir well with a fork to distribute the grains into the water and cover the pan with the lid. Turn off the heat and leave undisturbed for exactly 5 minutes without removing the lid. During this time, the couscous will absorb all the liquid. We use some dehydrated onion to add a little more taste to the dish, but once again, this is a personal choice and onions are not needed to obtain a properly cooked couscous. Once the time is up, remove the lid and thoroughly fluff the grains with a fork to complete the preparation. Now that looks pretty good to me. Do you like it? We hope so, as the whole point of the recipe was to make something for you to enjoy. Today's recipe is about cooking quinoa. There are many recipes around about how to get the best out of your quinoa, but we tried to make a recipe that will allow you to get a perfectly cooked quinoa that isn't too mushy, as many quinoa dishes are ruined by the excess use of water. The first step to obtain a non-bitter quinoa is to thoroughly wash it to remove the bitter-tasting saponins from the outer layer. Rub and swish the quinoa around with your hand, and this will remove any undesired taste. Once finished, make sure to drain the quinoa properly before moving on. Now, place a small pot over a high heat, pour in the water and bring it to a boil. As soon as the water starts to boil, add the quinoa to the water, give it a good stir with a fork and cover the pot with a lid. Now lower the heat to the minimum and cook the grains for exactly 15 minutes. Once that time's up, turn off the heat and let the quinoa rest for another 3 minutes before removing the lid. This will allow any residual moisture to be absorbed.